In the heart of rural Tennessee, where rolling hills met endless fields of golden corn, the Harlan family had carved out a life as sturdy as the oak trees lining their driveway. Elijah Harlan, a weathered farmer in his late 50s, had inherited the land from his father, who got it from his. It wasn't much, just a modest farmhouse, a barn that creaked in the wind, and enough acreage to keep the bills paid if the weather cooperated. But to Elijah, it was everything. His wife, Maria, a schoolteacher with a laugh that could chase away storm clouds, had been his rock for 30 years. Together, they raised 3 kids: Sarah, the eldest at 28, a city girl now working as a nurse in Nashville; Jacob, 25, who stayed home to help with the farm; and little Mia, just 16, with dreams bigger than the Smoky Mountains. The Harlans weren't rich in money, but they were wealthy in love, a bond forged through hardships that would break lesser families. It all started one crisp autumn morning in 2022, when Elijah woke to the sound of Maria coughing in the kitchen. At first, he thought it was just the change in seasons, the way the chill air irritated her throat. But as weeks turned to months, the cough lingered, growing harsher, until one day she collapsed while grading papers at the dining table. "Doc says it's lung cancer," Elijah told the kids over a tense family dinner that night. Sarah had driven down from Nashville, her scrub still on from her shift. Jacob sat silently, fiddling with his fork, while Mia's eyes welled with tears. The word, cancer, hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Maria, ever the optimist, squeezed Elijah's hand. "We'll fight this together, like we always do. Families are strength, remember." The diagnosis hit like a tornado ripping through their quiet life. Treatments began immediately, chemotherapy sessions in the city, hours of driving back and forth. Elijah took on extra chores, rising before dawn to tend the fields, his back aching but his resolve unbroken. Sarah rearranged her schedule, coming home every weekend to help with meals and doctor visits. Jacob, who had always been the quiet one, stepped up, managing the farm's daily grind with a determination that surprised even him. And Mia, she threw herself into school projects, baking cookies for the family, anything to keep the darkness at bay. As winter blanketed the farm in snow, the challenges mounted. The chemo made Maria weak, her once vibrant hair falling out in clumps. She wore a scarf now, knitted by Mia, and smiled through the pain. "This is just a chapter," she'd say, "not the whole book." But bills piled up like drifts against the barn door. Insurance covered some, but not all. Elijah sold off a prized tractor to pay for the next round of treatments, his heart heavy as he watched it drive away. One evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Sarah broached the subject they'd all been avoiding. "Dad, maybe we should think about selling some land. Just a parcel. It could cover the costs." Elijah's face hardened. "This land is our legacy, Sarah. Your grandpa fought in Korea to come back to it. I won't let it go without a fight." Tension crackled like the logs in the fire. Jacob nodded in agreement, but Mia burst out, "What about Mom? Isn't she our legacy too?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. That night, they hugged tighter, the unbreakable bond reminding them that arguments were just storms, they'd pass. Spring brought hope and more trials. Maria's scans showed the tumor shrinking, a small victory that had them cheering over homemade apple pie. But then Jacob's truck broke down on the way to market, stranding him with a load of produce that spoiled in the heat. "Of all the rotten luck," he muttered, kicking the tire. Sarah loaned him money from her savings, but it stung. Pride was a Harlan trait. Mia, sensing the strain, organized a community fundraiser at school. "Moms taught half the town," she said. "They'll help." And they did. Neighbors showed up with casseroles, donations, and stories of how Maria had touched their lives. It wasn't enough to erase the debt, but it lightened the load, showing the family they weren't alone. Yet, as summer sweltered on, a new storm brewed. Elijah suffered a mild heart attack while plowing the fields, the stress finally catching up. Hospitalized for days, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. "What if I can't provide any more?" he confided to Maria during a visit. She held his hand, her own frail from treatment. "You've provided love, Eli. That's the enduring strength we need." The kids rallied again. Sarah took leave from work, Jacob hired a temporary hand with the fundraiser money, and Mia learned to drive the old pickup to run errands. It was during this time that the family's true mettle shone. They started, Harlan huddles, nightly gatherings where they'd share highs and lows, no judgment, just support. Sarah opened up about her own burnout at the hospital, Jacob admitted his fear of failing the farm, and Mia confessed her worry about college dreams slipping away. Through tears and laughter, they wove their individual struggles into a tapestry of collective resilience. "We're not unbreakable because we're perfect," Maria said one night. "We're unbreakable because we bend together." Fall arrived with harvest time, a metaphor for their journey. The corn stood tall, ready for reaping, much like the family after weathering the year's tempests. Maria's treatments wrapped up, and though remission wasn't guaranteed, her energy returned. Elijah, recovered, worked side by side with Jacob, teaching him old tricks. Sarah decided to move back home part-time, commuting to Nashville. And Mia, she won a scholarship for her essay on Family's Enduring Strength, inspired by their ordeal. But life, ever unpredictable, threw one final curve. A massive storm hit in October, flooding the fields and destroying half the crop. Water rose to the farmhouse steps, forcing evacuation to a neighbor's. As they huddled in the dim light, watching the rain lash the windows, Elijah felt despair creep in. "Maybe it's time to let go," he whispered. Maria shook her head. "No, love. This bond, it's what rebuilds." The next morning, with the sun breaking through, the community descended. Tractors from miles around cleared debris, volunteers replanted what they could, and the Harlans led the charge. Sarah coordinated relief efforts, Jacob directed the machinery, Mia documented it all for a school project that went viral locally, drawing more help. In the midst of the chaos, Elijah realized, their strength wasn't in the land alone, but in the roots they'd planted in each other and their town. Years passed, and the farm thrived again. Maria beat the cancer, her scarf now a memento in a drawer. Elijah retired, passing the reins to Jacob, who innovated with sustainable practices. Sarah married a fellow nurse, starting her own family nearby. Mia headed to college on that scholarship, majoring in social work to help others like them. Looking back, the Harlans often gathered for holidays, toasting to the unbreakable bond. It wasn't just surviving illness, debt, and disasters, it was thriving through them. In a world that pulled families apart, theirs endured, a testament to love's quiet power. Word count: 1024. Wait, that's short. Let me expand this story to reach closer to 2,000 words. Expanded version. In the heart of rural Tennessee, where the rolling hills of the Cumberland Plateau met endless fields of golden corn swaying under the vast blue sky, the Harlan family had carved out a life as sturdy and timeless as the ancient oak trees that lined their winding gravel driveway. Elijah Harlan, a weathered farmer in his late 50s with calloused hands and a sun-creased face, had inherited the 200-acre plot from his father, who had received it from his own. It wasn't a sprawling estate, just a modest two-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a red barn that creaked ominously in high winds, and enough fertile soil to keep the bills paid if the weather gods smiled upon them. But to Elijah, it was more than dirt and buildings, it was a legacy, a piece of America that pulsed with the blood, sweat, and stories of generations. His wife, Maria, a dedicated elementary schoolteacher with an infectious laugh that could chase away even the darkest storm clouds, had been his steadfast partner for over 30 years. She brought warmth to the home, her kitchen always smelling of fresh baked bread or simmering stew. Together, they had raised 3 children, Sarah, the eldest at 28, who had traded the farm life for the bustling energy of Nashville, where she worked long shifts as a registered nurse in a busy hospital. Jacob, 25, the strong and silent type who had chosen to stay behind, helping his father with the daily rigors of farming, and young Mia, just 16, a bright-eyed dreamer with aspirations that stretched far beyond the county lines, perhaps to the bright lights of Hollywood or the intellectual halls of a big university. The Harlans weren't wealthy in the material sense, no fancy cars or exotic vacations for them. Their riches lay in the intangible, an unbreakable bond of love, trust, and mutual support, forged in the fires of everyday hardships that would have shattered lesser families. This bond was about to be tested like never before, in a tale that would become legend in their small community of Willow Creek. It all began on a crisp autumn morning in 2022. Elijah awoke to the familiar sounds of the farm, roosters crowing, the distant low of cattle, and the soft hum of Maria preparing breakfast in the kitchen. But something was off. Maria's usual cheerful humming was interrupted by a persistent cough, deep and rattling, that echoed through the house. At first, Elijah dismissed it as nothing more than the seasonal change. The chill in the air often brought on such irritations. "Just a cold, darlin'," he said, kissing her forehead. But as the weeks stretched into months, the cough refused to fade. It grew harsher, more insistent, until one fateful afternoon when Maria collapsed onto the kitchen floor while grading a stack of third-grade math papers at the scarred oak dining table. Elijah rushed her to the local clinic, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Tests were run, specialists consulted, and finally, the diagnosis came like a thunderclap: stage 3 lung cancer. The word, cancer, sliced through the air, leaving a void of silence in its wake. That evening, over a tense family dinner of Maria's famous pot roast, now tasting like ash in their mouths, Elijah broke the news to the children. Sarah had driven the 2 hours from Nashville, still in her blue scrubs stained from a long day. Jacob sat rigidly, his fork idle in his hand, while Mia's wide eyes filled with unshed tears, her lower lip trembling. "Doc says it's treatable, but it's gonna be a battle," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Maria, ever the pillar of optimism, reached across the table to squeeze his arm. "We'll fight this together, just like we always have. Families are enduring strength, remember. We've weathered droughts, floods, and that time the barn roof caved in. This is no different." The diagnosis upended their world like a tornado ripping through the cornfields. Treatments commenced almost immediately, grueling chemotherapy sessions at a cancer center in Knoxville, requiring hours of driving on winding backroads. Elijah took on extra responsibilities, rising before the first light of dawn to feed the animals, plow the fields, and repair fences, his back protesting with every movement but his resolve as unyielding as the Tennessee clay. Sarah rearranged her hectic nursing schedule, sacrificing sleep to drive home every weekend, helping with meals, laundry, and shuttling Maria to appointments. Jacob, who had always been the quiet backbone of the operation, stepped up without complaint, managing the farm's daily grind with a fierce determination that surprised even his father. And Mia, the baby of the family, threw herself into distractions, school projects, baking batches of chocolate chip cookies for everyone, anything to keep the encroaching darkness at bay and maintain a semblance of normalcy. As winter descended, blanketing the farm in a thick layer of snow that muffled the world outside, the challenges compounded like interest on a bad loan. The chemotherapy ravaged Maria's body, leaving her weak and nauseous, her once lush auburn hair falling out in heartbreaking clumps. She took to wearing colorful scarves, one knitted by Mia in a burst of teenage creativity, and forced smiles through the pain that etched lines on her face. "This is just a chapter in our story," she'd whisper to Elijah in the quiet hours of the night, "not the whole book. We'll turn the page together." But the medical bills arrived relentlessly, piling up on the kitchen counter like snowdrifts against the barn door. Insurance covered a portion, but copays, deductibles, and experimental drugs added up to thousands. Elijah made the painful decision to sell off his prized John Deere tractor, a machine that had been with him for 2 decades, watching with a heavy heart as the buyer drove it away down the driveway. "It's just metal," he told himself, but it felt like selling a piece of his soul. One blustery evening, as the family gathered around the crackling fireplace in the living room, flames dancing shadows on the walls, Sarah broached the topic they'd all been skirting like a pothole in the road. "Dad, maybe we should consider selling a parcel of land. Just 10 acres or so. It could cover the next round of treatments without dipping into savings." Elijah's face hardened, his jaw set like granite. "This land is our legacy, Sarah. Your grandpa fought in Korea, came back with shrapnel in his leg, just to till this soil. I won't let it go without a damn good fight." The room tensed, the air thick with unspoken words. Jacob nodded in silent agreement, his loyalty to the farm unwavering, but Mia, her voice cracking with emotion, burst out, "What about Mom? Isn't she our real legacy? Land can be bought back, but we can't lose her." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the pop of embers. That night, they hugged a little tighter, apologies whispered in the dark, the unbreakable bond reminding them that arguments were merely passing storms in the grand scheme of their shared life. Spring arrived tentatively, with budding flowers and warmer breezes, bringing a glimmer of hope amid the ongoing trials. Maria's latest scans showed the tumor shrinking, slowly, but surely, A small victory that had the family cheering over a celebratory homemade apple pie, Maria's recipe perfected over years. "See, we're winning," she said, her eyes sparkling for the first time in months. But fate, ever capricious, struck again when Jacob's old Ford pickup broke down on the highway to the farmer's market, stranding him with a full load of fresh produce that wilted and spoiled under the relentless sun. Of all the rotten luck, he growled, kicking the flat tire in frustration. The loss was a financial hit they could ill afford. Sarah, without hesitation, loaned him money from her personal savings, funds she'd been squirreling away for a down payment on an apartment in Nashville. It stung Jacob's pride, but he accepted, vowing to pay her back. Mia, sensing the family's fraying edges, took initiative. She organized a community fundraiser at her high school, rallying classmates and teachers. "Moms taught half the kids in this town," she argued to the principal. "They'll want to help." And help they did. The event, a bake sale, car wash, and silent auction, drew neighbors from miles around. They arrived with covered dishes, cash donations, and heartfelt stories of how Maria had inspired their children or lent a listening ear during tough times. It wasn't a fortune, but it eased the immediate burden, reinforcing that the Harlan's strength extended beyond their front door into the fabric of Willow Creek. Yet, as the summer heat baked the earth and cicadas sang their endless chorus, another blow fell. Elijah, pushing himself too hard in the fields under the scorching sun, suffered a mild heart attack. He collapsed beside the plow, clutching his chest, the world spinning. Rushed to the hospital, he spent days in a sterile room, staring at the beige ceiling, questioning his life's choices. "What if I can't provide for y'all anymore?" he confided to Maria during one of her visits, his voice weak. She held his hand, her own still frail from chemo, and replied softly, "You've provided more than enough, Eli. Love, guidance, a home. That's the enduring strength that matters most. The rest, we'll figure it out as a family." The children rallied once more. Sarah took unpaid leave from her job, moving back temporarily to coordinate care. Jacob hired a temporary farmhand using the fundraiser proceeds, swallowing his pride to keep things running. Mia, at 16, learned to drive the old pickup, running errands and picking up prescriptions, her maturity blooming like the wildflowers along the roadside. It was in these trying months that the family's true resilience emerged, shining like a beacon. They instituted Harlan huddles, mandatory nightly gatherings in the living room where each member shared their highs and lows of the day, no topic off limits, no judgment passed. Sarah confessed her burnout from endless hospital shifts, the emotional toll of seeing patients suffer. Jacob admitted his deep-seated fear of failing to uphold the family farm, of being the one to let the legacy slip away. Mia opened up about her anxiety over college dreams fading amid the chaos, wondering if she'd ever escape the small-town life. Through raw conversations, tears, and shared laughter, they wove their individual threads of struggle into a stronger, collective tapestry. "We're not unbreakable because we're flawless," Maria reflected one evening, her voice steady. "We're unbreakable because we bend, adapt, and hold each other up when the winds howl." Fall returned with the harvest season, a poetic parallel to their year's journey. The cornfield stood tall and proud, ears heavy with golden kernels, ready for reaping, just as the family had endured and grown through adversity. Maria completed her treatments, and while full remission wasn't promised, her energy surged back, color returning to her cheeks. Elijah, fully recovered, worked alongside Jacob, passing on wisdom from decades in the soil: when to plant, how to read the weather, the art of negotiation at market. Sarah made the bold choice to transition to part-time work in Nashville, commuting to spend more days at home. And Mia, her essay on Family's Enduring Strength, born from their trials, won her a full-ride scholarship to the University of Tennessee, her ticket to broader horizons. But life, in its infinite unpredictability, had one more test in store. In late October, a ferocious storm system barreled through the region, dumping inches of rain in hours. Floodwaters rose rapidly, inundating the lower fields and lapping at the farmhouse foundation. The family evacuated to a neighbor's higher ground, huddling in the dim light of lanterns as wind howled and rain pelted the roof. Elijah, watching the deluge from the window, felt a wave of despair crash over him. "Maybe it's time to let go of the farm," he murmured to Maria, his voice barely audible over the storm. She shook her head firmly. "No, my love. This bond we have, it's what rebuilds everything. Bricks and mortar, crops and dreams. We'll rise again. Dawn broke with the storm's retreat, revealing a landscape of devastation. Fields underwater, fences toppled, the barn partially collapsed. But as the sun climbed, so did the community's spirit. Neighbors arrived in droves, tractors rumbling down the roads, volunteers with shovels and chainsaws. They cleared debris, pumped out water, and even donated seeds for replanting. The Harlans led the effort. Sarah organized supply chains and medical check-ins for the weary workers, Jacob directed the heavy machinery with expert precision, and Mia captured the recovery on her phone, turning it into a social media campaign that drew aid from beyond Willow Creek, even a grant from a state relief fund. In the aftermath, as the farm slowly revived, Elijah stood amid the drying fields, arm around Maria, watching their children work together. He realized then that their enduring strength wasn't rooted solely in the land, but in the deep, intertwining roots they'd nurtured in one another and their extended family of friends and neighbors. The unbreakable bond had not only sustained them, it had transformed them. Years later, the Harlan farm flourished anew. Maria, cancer-free for 5 years, returned to teaching part-time, inspiring a new generation. Elijah retired gracefully, his days